Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me again. I'm bloody pumped for tonight, I tell you what. So this will be my first time capturing the core in 2021. I've seen plenty of images floating around on the internet and it's just been killing me inside. We've had shocking weather up here in the Hunter Valley and pretty much all around New South Wales for the past couple of months. So haven't been able to get out and shoot the core yet. So tonight's the night. It's an absolutely beautiful night out here tonight. There's a few clouds rolling through, but hopefully they shouldn't give us too much drama. And as the title would suggest, what we're going to do tonight is a start to finish Milkyway panorama. So I'm going to bring you guys along. We're going to go out and capture it. And then we're going to jump back into the editing suite. I'm going to show you how to put it together right from stitching the panorama to the finishing touches in Photoshop and Lightroom. It's going to be a long one, just the nature of the video. So get comfy, grab a cool drink and enjoy. Righto guys, we're out here, we're all set up ready to shoot. Now I just wanted to touch a little bit on planing. I won't do a full in-depth thing on planing because there's plenty of those out on YouTube, and I'd highly recommend jumping over to Richard Taddy's channel, Nightscape Images, and he's got some really good planing videos. Anyway, I just wanted to touch on that. So I've been here before in the daylight. I've scouted this location out, a few months ago, and I've just been sitting on it waiting for the right time. Now, if you've watched my previous video about how I shoot Milky Way panoramas, and if you haven't, I suggest you go back and watch that before you watch this one. Now, in that, I talked about the order in which I'm going to shoot panoramas. So tonight, the Milky Way is rising up here behind me in the southeast. Now, because it's rising, and I want it to rise up into my picture, I'm going to start shooting the top left row of the panorama. So I'll start on the top left, work my way across, and come back to the start, next row down, work my way across, work my way across. And for the foreground, obviously I need to shoot a separate foreground, being that I'm tracking. I'm thinking I'm going to shoot the foreground tonight, but because the Milky Way is rising so early in the morning, I guess you could say late in the morning, but by the time I'm finished, I'm only going to be maybe an hour away from sunrise, so I can actually utilise the blue hour before sunrise to shoot my foreground as well. Now, obviously towards the end of the season, when the sun sets and you can start to see the Milky Way straight away over in the western sky, you can do it a bit back to front, so you can shoot your foreground first in the blue hour, leave your gear set up, and then shoot your Milky Way. But anyway, with that said, we'll rip into it. So tonight, it's pretty much the same setup as I normally go to. Sony A7R2, it's got the Astro modification, so it's more sensitive to the hydrogen alpha or the red. And Skywatcher Star Adventurer. I'm going to be running a dew heater tonight because it is a bit fresh and we've already reached dew point, so everything's already soaking wet. But that's pretty much it. So let's rip in and get these images done. So I've just ripped off a couple of test exposures there, and the settings I've come up with it's pretty much my go-to. I'm on the 35mm Samyang f1.4, so I'm stopping that down to f2.8 just to sharpen it up a little bit. I'm going to push the exposure time out a little bit, so I'm going to go to 3.5 minutes and I'm going to shoot ISO 800. I'm going to start with that, and I might do a few more test shots because there is a little bit of light pollution over to the west there, and I just want to make sure I don't blow out the highlights in that area. But at this stage, they're the settings I'm going with, so let's rip in, get them done. Well, that was a bit more challenging than I was expecting it to be. Clouds rolled through, fog rolled in, I'm drenched, my gear's drenched. We definitely hit dew point. So yeah, my second camera's all fogged up. I only brought the one dew heater with me, so I don't know how that time lapse will turn out, but it is what it is. But hey, where else would you rather be? After all this bad weather, I'm just stoked to be out here. The sky tonight was bloody awesome. It was just neon green with air glow. So we'll just have to see how that comes up in post-production, but yeah, it was awesome. So because of the clouds rolling through, and I was a bit worried about the fog rolling in, the settings changed a little bit camera-wise, so I ended up doing f2.8, ISO 1600, and I was doing 2-minute exposures. So that turned out pretty good. And it's about 4:30 now in the morning. As you can see behind me, Jupiter's rising. So we're not that far before the blue hour. So I'm just gonna hang out here, shoot the foregrounds in the blue hour, and call it a night. So I'll see you guys back in the studio. Welcome to the studio. Well, not much of a studio, but my computer anyway. And this is where all the magic happens. And it's a different sort of magic than what you'd see on MTV Cribs. So we had a great night out there on location. All the images that I've brought into Lightroom look really good. So we're going to jump in and check them out. Now, before we start, I just wanted to say that this is my way of editing. So everyone does it a little bit differently, and there's obviously a lot of different ways people edit their images and different techniques they use. Now, we all sort of come up with the same end result, but we all go about it a slightly different way. So some of this stuff might be a little bit out of left field or a little bit old school, but it works for me at the moment. So that's why I stick with the way I'm doing it. And you might pick up some things out of this that you didn't know, or maybe you did know, but it's a slightly different way of doing it. And if that helps, that's awesome. Maybe you can take a little bit out of this and a little bit out of other stuff you've learnt, and sort of create your own post-processing style. So with that said, we're going to jump in here and check out our images in Lightroom. So you can see here we've got, what do we got, 46 images that we've captured. And I'll just click on one of these images. And here's one of our images from the core. Now, as I said, the shutter speed and settings changed a little bit just because of the changing conditions, but that's all good. Now, I don't do much in Lightroom in regards with basic edits. Pretty much all I'm going to do is come all the way down the bottom here and just make sure noise reduction's on 0 and sharpening's on 0. Now, we don't want to add any sharpening now. We can do that later in Photoshop. And with noise reduction, we don't want to soften the image up straight from the get-go. So one of the advantages of shooting such a large panorama is we're essentially hiding the noise, shrinking it all down. So what we'll find is what looks like a reasonably clean image. There is a bit of noise there, but when we stitch it all together, that noise will sort of disappear. And if it doesn't disappear too much, we can add noise reduction later when the image is all done. The only other thing I'll do here is enable the profile corrections. Now I've had to tell it that it's a Samyang 35 1.4 just because it's a manual lens, and it doesn't have any metadata on the lens. So I've done that, and what you can see is as we toggle this on and off, it just pulls that distortion out of it and gets rid of a bit of vignette, which will help us out when we stitch the panorama. So that's pretty much it for Lightroom. I just export all these, export them as TIFF files, full size, and just throw them in a folder, and we can jump over to the stitching software. Now, PT GUI is my go-to stitching software now. Some of you might have heard it before. For those who haven't, it is a paid software. Now, it's a little bit funny when it comes to software. I see people drop bucket loads of cash on cameras and lenses without even thinking. They'll see a $2,000 lens pre-released and they'll just order it without even thinking. It's just ordered. As long as you tell your wife that it was on sale. But when it comes to software and there's a $200 or $300 program, people get a little bit hesitant to spend money on software, and it's pretty funny because it's such an important part of our workflow, and there's no point in having awesome images on your memory card and not being able to do what you want to do with them. So it is a massive part. And the thing I would also say about panoramas is Lightroom and Photoshop can do them, but they don't do a very good job. Now, especially as we get into longer focal length, so 35mm is not too bad, but as we jump up into 50mm, 85mm, it starts to have a little bit of problems with it. Now, the analogy I normally would use is if you'd want a on-road car, a fast car, you'd get that. If you wanted an off-road car to go rock crawling, then you'd buy yourself an off-road car. You wouldn't buy an SUV because an SUV can sort of do road, it can sort of do off-road, but it's not great. It's not great at anything. So that's sort of where Lightroom and Photoshop sit in regards with panoramas. They can do everything, but it's not designed for that purpose. Now, PT GUI is designed for one purpose, and it is to stitch panoramas. So this is just a program I use. There are other ones out there, but I haven't used them, so I can only speak for PT GUI. But this thing's absolutely awesome. So we're going to jump in here, and it's just going to ask us to load some images. So I've got some images here. We'll get these loaded up. Now it's asking me what focal lengths. Like I said, there's no metadata about this lens because it's a manual lens. So it was a 35mm. And it's just going to bring them all up. Now we can see them all up here, and it's as simple as clicking Align Images. And normally straight out of the box, it does a pretty good job of aligning all the images and giving us a pretty good result. And you just have to bear in mind, these file sizes are going to be huge, absolutely huge. Now, we've stitched the panorama, and I know what you're thinking. That looks like a dog's breakfast, but we'll fix that. So, if we think about Photoshop and Lightroom, normally you get 3 different projection modes, and that's all you get. Now with PT GUI, you get millions. So if we come up to the top here, to the projection mode, you get all these different projection modes. Now, I'm not going to go through them all. And if you want to know anything more specific about the program, PT GUI themselves have a lot of videos on tutorials on this program. Now, if we sort of jumped in depth with this, we'd be here all day. But my go-to normally is the stereographic projection. And as we can see here, it looks like half the panorama is missing. But we're just going to grab these toggles down the bottom and just stretch them out. And we'll grab this one here and stretch it out. Now the great thing about PT GUI is now we can manipulate how this panorama looks. In other stitching software that you can't manipulate, and you guys would have seen this online, the Milky Way, when you shoot a full panorama arch, at the top there it gets all stretched and flattened out, and it looks real strange and distorted. Now with a program like this, that's not an issue anymore, and I'll show you why. So if we just hold our mouse somewhere and just click and drag, we can drag this anywhere we want it. Now, so I've just dragged that to the left just to sort of pull all the frames around, and as you can see, it's showing us where all our images were, and you can see I've started up here at number 1 and gone right around and then back here, and then obviously the bottom row. Now, our horizon line has got a big bow in it at the moment, so if I just click somewhere in the center here and drag up, it's going to pull that horizon pretty straight. And as you can see, it's given us that nice big bow of the Milky Way. Now that horizon's not too bad. We do want to get it as close as we can to flat in the stitching software, just so that when we take it into Photoshop, we don't have to warp and pull on it as much. So that's looking pretty good. The other thing I would keep an eye on is if there's any spots that are missing, like up here, and it's just a part of it, you're going to miss spots. right up on the zenith. It's just the way it is. We just need to position this in a way that works with the composition that we're going to use. So obviously I'm going to crop this when we get into Photoshop. Now I'm just looking at Rowafuki up here, and the distance I've got from this area down to Rowafuki. So that means I can come across with a square crop and still have Rowafuki in, and I'll come down and crop down here. And I'll probably come down and crop somewhere down here. So at the moment this is looking pretty good. Now all we would do is just go back to the start. Now in this program they've got what's called an optimizer. Now the optimizer is just us asking the software, can it look at the panorama and see if it's found any stitching errors. So we're going to run the optimizer. Now as you can see here, it's looked at all the control points and the distances between them, and it's saying it's very good. So if it says it's very good, it's very good. But just for the sake of this video, I'm going to jump in and we can manually check. So if we jump into the control points tab, what we can see now is what the software is using to line one image up with the other. Now you can see here we've got image 1 on this side and image 2 on this side. Now obviously number 6 here is number 6 here, and it's using those points. So the most important part when you're looking at stitching errors in this sort of stitching software is any images that contain the foreground in them. Now if I jump over here to image 13, which will line up with image 14, we can see here that the stitching software hasn't picked anywhere on the tree as a control point. Now that's good, because if the software tried to line up one of the tree here with something on the tree here, the sky would have a little mismatch because the sky's moved in between our images. So we need the control points to be in the sky, and that way any stitching artifacts will be in the foreground, which we replace anyway. Now we're just going to jump over a bit more and check out a couple more. So I'll jump over to 31 and 32, and as you can see here, it's picked a couple of points in the sky and left the foreground alone. So that's cool. Now if we found any issues or anywhere that the software has picked the foreground as a control point, we can just right click on it and delete that control point, which obviously tells the software not to use it. Rightio, so with that done, we're going to jump back into create panorama. Now I've already saved this, so I'm not going to save it again, but up here we'll jump into the file format, and these files are going to be huge. So this was shot on a 42 megapixel camera, and as you can see we're going to have 46 of them. So it's going to be a couple of thousand megapixel image, you know, probably 15 gig worth of images. So we're going to save it in the Photoshop large, and we're going to jump down here and we're going to put it into a 16-bit file. That's pretty much it for what we've got to do here. So all these default settings that PT GUI give us are all pretty good. So we're just going to leave that as it is, and all we need to do is hit create panorama and it'll just save it off for us. So I've jumped over here into Photoshop, and you can see here we've got our sky portion there and our foreground here. So the first thing I'm just going to do is just crop this down a little bit. So I've got all this space we don't need, so we're just going to crop him in a bit, probably about there. I'll probably crop it about there, just keeping in mind that we've got a foreground that's going in there. I'll just tuck this in a bit too. Somewhere about there. Now we're just going to jump over to our foreground, and I'm just going to select it all and go copy and paste. Now because I didn't crop this one down, it's a little bit out. And that's it, we're done. Thanks for watching. No. So you can get a bit of an idea of what's going on now. So what I'm going to do is just jump over here to this layer and drop the opacity down just so we can see sort of where it's lining up with the sky. Now we can see this tree here, the center tree. We can roughly put that where it needs to go. But you can see over here, this tree doesn't line up at all, and nothing lines up on this side. So what we're going to do is we're just going to transform it, and we're just going to do a scale transform. So I'm just going to pull this in until we can see that tree on the left start to come in. Now I'm going to go a bit further because you can see the gap between these two. Hopefully it's similar to the gap between those two, and as we pull it back, I need to do a little bit more. And we're getting pretty close there. Now the reason these don't line up so well is for our sky, we've taken so many images and we've shot 180-degree panorama, so the stitching software is going to stretch and pull and yank in all different directions, so it's going to twist and warp and do all kinds of funny things. Now with the foreground, there isn't so many images and it's a pretty straightforward single row panorama, so there's going to be nowhere near as much distortion and warping in this foreground image, so we're just going to have to do our best to try and line things back up. And I think we're getting there. So that looks pretty close for now, so I'm just going to leave it like that. And we'll bring this opacity back up to 100%. So now what I want to do is throw a layer mask on this foreground layer, and we're just going to start brushing it out. So we'll zoom in a little bit and we'll grab a brush, make it nice and hard. And we want a black brush. And we're just going to start painting away the sky. Now you don't have to be too accurate at this stage. All we want to do is just sort of get rid of the majority of it, and we'll go back in and fine tune the selection. Okay, so now what I might do is I might actually do a crop on this just so I'm not playing around with things I don't need to be. So we're going to just jump in and sort of get what our final crop's going to be. Now I think I want that tree I want that tree to be somewhat in the center and somewhat on that 1/3 line. Now I think that looks pretty good. And that way we're not masking and mucking around with things we don't need. So we've got a nice arch through the sky, and the arch sort of disappears at the same point, left and right, tree in the middle. Awesome. So we'll just zoom back in now. And there's a lot of different ways you can come up with a mask, and I know Photoshop does the sky replacement, but for me, I like to do really large prints, and it just doesn't do a good enough job at selecting the horizon line to have large prints. So we've got to go in and do it manually. Now, there are also plugins you can buy for Photoshop that'll do you a luminosity mask to try and get these complex selections, but for me, I just do it manually. So I've just clicked on our foreground layer. I'm going to jump up here to select and color range. Now up here you can see sampled colors. So I'm going to tell Photoshop what to sample. So I'm going to click over here, and this fuzziness is just us expanding the range. So it's picked a color there, and if I bring this fuzziness up, it's telling Photoshop to select a little bit more either side of that color that I've selected. Now you can see down here it's selected the color I want. Now if I increase the fuzziness, you can see it's going to start selecting a bit more. Now you don't want to go too crazy with it. You want to keep your fuzziness reasonably low. And all we do is go over here and click on the plus icon, and we'll just go along the horizon line and click plus. Now as we do that, it's just going to keep adding colors to that selection, and if we watch that preview box, we can see more and more white coming up. Now white is good because it's what we want to select, and it's done a pretty good job. So you can see now we've got a pretty good selection along the horizon line, so we're going to hit OK. So now you can see it's put those marching ants all around that area. Now don't be too concerned about this area here, because we're not going to paint down there. We're not going to create a mask from this selection. We're just going to paint inside the lines. So if we jump over to our layer mask now and we grab a brush, a black brush, it's only going to brush where those marching ants are. So as you can see here, as we brush, it's brushing away only what's inside those marching ants. Okay, so we'll just deselect that, and you can start to see what's happening here. Now there are areas that have popped through from the sky layer, but that's all good. We can go in and fix them later, but what we can notice is it hasn't done a perfect selection. So what we're going to do is go to our layer mask, hit Alt and click on it, and it's actually going to bring up what our mask looks like. Now we just got to remember obviously that we see what's in white and we don't see what's in black. So I'm just going to get a black brush and just paint out all this sky. Because remember, this is our foreground layer, so we only want to see white where the foreground is. So we'll zoom in a bit, and you can see these grey areas. That's where it hasn't done a perfect selection. Now the great thing about this being a black and white mask is we can use dodge and burn to help us out. So if we use the burn tool, it's only going to burn anything that's in the shadows. So if we turn this up to 100% and we start painting on this, it's not going to affect the white areas because the white's obviously in the highlights. So we can just really go in here and really tighten up this mask like this. And it's going to leave that horizon selection alone. And same here, it's only going to paint away the grey areas because white is in the highlights, and the burn tool is going to leave that alone. And we'll just keep going over here and fixing all this. Now for areas like this over here, we can come back in and do another selection to fix that. Now for areas like this, I'm just going to change to a white brush. We can just get rid of that with a white brush. And then same with all these little stars, these streaky stars that are left over. You can zoom in, grab a black brush, and a black brush. And we'll just get rid of these. Now, you don't have to be anywhere near this critical if all you're going to be doing is Instagram and Facebook stuff. I like to do these prints very large, so a couple of meters on the long edge, or for you backwards people in Imperial, you know, 6 feet plus on the long edge. So if you're going to be doing that, we need a really good selection of the horizon. Otherwise you're just going to see that this has been blended back together, and we don't want that. We want it to obviously look like a single image. And we're getting pretty close. Almost there. Now I'd be interested to hear from you guys about how you do your selections and masking. So if you do something a lot different than this, let us know. Drop it in the comments and just let us know how you do yours. It'd be very interesting to see all the different ways people make selections and do masking. So that looks pretty good. Now, like I said, we can go back in. I'll just click back on the foreground layer here, and we can go back in and do the same thing and get rid of this area here. So we'll go select color range, and I'm just going to jump in here and grab this. And it's selected that. Jump back over to our mask, grab a brush, and we're just going to brush this out. Awesome. Now what you can see is we've got a bit of the sky layer poking through, so we just need to adjust our foreground to maybe pop back up a little bit to hide that. And there we go. So we've got a nice horizon line now. It looks awesome. What you can see the shadow of this tree, but we'll go in and fix that later. And we've got a few more streaky stars. We'll just fix them while we're here. Alrighty, so that looks pretty good. So from this point, we're going to jump in and we'll do a merge layer, and we're going to keep these layers below because now we've got a perfect mask of that horizon line. So we can use that now to do selective edits on either the foreground or the sky. So we're definitely going to keep that. Now, with this layer, I'm going to duplicate it just so we've got a backup. And I'm going to deselect actually I might go back. We're going to we'll get rid of that one. I just want to show you guys this step. So if we turn off this foreground layer, you can see this old tree here, and you can see it's creating a bit of a shadow there. Now we want to get rid of that. So the easiest way to do that, I've found, is to just content aware fill it out. And it does a pretty good job. So if we just go up here to the lasso and we'll just make a selection. Doesn't have to be super critical, but as long as we're somewhere near where we need to be. Now, with I know you guys are going to come out and say you can just move your camera to the other side of this tree and shoot the sky unimpeded. Now, I do understand that, but for me, it starts to bring up some ethical questions about composite images. Now for me, I'll just leave the camera in the same position and shoot the sky in the foreground. And that way it's a true representation of what was there. Now, if I had shot the foreground and then moved my camera in front of this tree to shoot the sky, we wouldn't have this issue. There wouldn't be a tree in here. And I do understand that the sky still would be in the same position. But if you're the sort of person who gets into photography competitions and things like that, and they want to have a look at your raw files, it really starts to blur that line between what's a composite image and what's a true image, because you've actually moved your camera between images. So I just like to do it old school, and it makes it a bit harder in post-processing, as you can see, but yeah. So we're just going to go to edit, content aware fill, and pray it does a good job. Now it normally does do a pretty good job. That's not too bad. Now you can see it's had a bit of a wobbly here, but that's not too bad. So all I would do from this point is grab a clone tool and just feather out what's happening here. Now we get a reasonable size one, and I'm only going to put the flow on 41% because we don't have a lot of stars down here just from the atmosphere. All we want to do is just blend away these hard edges. So I'm just going to grab an area here and just come in and just soften up this transition a little bit. And we've also got to keep in mind that we're going to have a tree going back in front of this, so you won't actually see that much of this. So that looks pretty good. No more shadows there. We do have a little bit of haloing going on around the tree, but that's all good. That gets fixed a little bit later. So we're at a point now where we're ready to start editing this image. Now, as you guys can see, this alone shows you the power of using a tracking mount. So we've done no adjustments to color, contrast, sharpening, anything like that. All we've done is put the image back together essentially. So put a static foreground back with our tracked sky, and it looks awesome already. So it just shows the power of, you know, using a tracking mount. So now we'll jump up and we'll create that merged layer. And from here, I'm just going to start with the curves. So we're just going to do a curves adjustment layer, and we're going to zoom in over here somewhere. And we're just going to do a really small stretch on it. So I'll grab this hand tool over here, and we're just going to pick somewhere in the mid-tones, somewhere about there, click on it, and I'm going to pull up ever so slightly. Now it's only going to be a slight amount, and I'm going to pick over here where it's dark, about there, and just pull down a little bit. Now what you can see that's done, if we toggle this on and off, is just created a lot more contrast, and you can see by this curve it's the slightest amount of S-curve we've put into it, so we haven't gone crazy at this stage. And throughout this video you're going to hear me say, you know, small steps, small steps, small steps. So we don't want, each layer we just want to do a tiny amount, and those tiny amounts add up to a fair bit. If we hit this thing with a sledgehammer from the start, it's going to be no good. So now with that done, now I'm just going to merge these layers down. I don't recommend you do that, but I just want to keep these files reasonably small, keep the computer ticking over. But I would suggest that you manage your layers better, so you know you're not being destructive. Now from here, I'm just going to duplicate this layer, and we're going to run a star reduction on this. Now a star reduction is another one of those controversial things. Some people love it, some people hate it, whether it's right or wrong, but I love it, so we're going to run one. Now there are plug-in programs you can buy that are essentially a one-click star reduction, but they all run off the same principle. So I've jumped up here into select, and we're going to go back into color range. Now instead of having sampled colors, we're going to just jump into highlights. Now you can see here that's already a pretty good selection of the highlights, but you can see if we move this around, it's going to select and deselect more or less based on what we want. I think that looks pretty good. So you can see now it's made a selection of those highlight areas. So we're going to go into select again, modify, and we're going to expand it, and we're just going to do it by 1 pixel. And then we'll go into select again, modify, and we're going to feather it by 1.5 pixels just to smooth out that selection and nothing's too harsh. So you can see now what it's got selected. We're going to go to filter, other, and then we're going to go to minimum, and we're going to make sure we've got preserve the roundness checked. Now with this minimum filter, we just need to be careful about how much minimization we're doing, because if we get too crazy, things can start to look a little bit weird. But I think we'll go 1 pixel for now, and we'll hit OK. So now you can see that we've got rid of a lot of stars, and if I turn this on and off, you can see what we've just done. We've sort of got rid of that, all those bright stars that really, essentially they're hiding all that dust in the Milky Way. So yeah, it's up to you what you like. If you want all the stars in there, then go for your life and just skip this step, but for me that's pretty good. Now if you think it's too much, great thing about Photoshop, is we can just reduce the opacity of this layer if you want to bring back a few of those stars. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in and just put back a few of the stars back towards the core. So I'm just going to put a layer mask on this, and I'm going to do a black brush, and I'm going to put the flow down pretty low. I'm just going to start brushing back in some of the stars in the Milky Way itself. Just so we don't lose too much detail. Now it's clear to see where we've done it, so what I'm going to do is jump into this layer mask, and we're just going to feather it right out. Somewhere about there. And you can just see we've brought a few stars back. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to get rid of this, merge it down, and duplicate this again so we've got a backup. So now I'm going to run a high pass on this. So high pass is just going to give us really good local contrast. So we're going to go up here into filter, other, and high pass. So with high pass, we'll put the box over here. So we're going to put the box over the Ralph-Fuki area, and you can see this beautiful orange cloud that happens up there. If we go all the way back and don't do any high pass, you can see it just disappears. Now if we start bringing this back up, you can now see that there's some awesome colors coming through Ralph-Fuki, and it's done an awesome job at giving a lot of local contrast to the dust in the Milky Way. Now there is a point of diminishing returns where stuff just starts to look weird and you're not gaining anything from it, so you just sort of got to go back and forward and find something that works pretty well. So for me it's about 41 for this image. Now we're just going to jump over now and change this blend mode to either overlay or soft light. Now I'm going to go soft light because overlay is pretty aggressive. Now what you can see it's done is just added a lot of local contrast to that Milky Way and really give it a good boot. But what it's also done is it's also affected the foreground. So what we're going to do is just grab our layer mask that we that we had before, hold Alt and we'll drag it up. Now as you can see, this one's back to front, so we're going to go Control I, we're going to invert it, so now it's only affecting the sky. And I think that looks pretty good. Okay. So from here, I'm going to merge this one down again, duplicate the layer. Now from here, I'm going to run a dodge and burn on the sky. There is a few different ways to do dodge and burn, but for today, I'm just going to run with the dodge and burn over here on the toolbar. Now I've got the layer copied, so I've got backup there. If I don't like it, I can just delete it. So we're just going to zoom in a bit here. And we're going to grab the dodge tool, and it's going to be targeting the midtone, so it's not going to affect any of this dark shadow area. Whatever we paint on here is only going to dodge or brighten up the midtones. So we'll grab this, grab a reasonable brush, and I'm only at 3%, so I'm only going to be really gentle with this. Now this is only, I would only put this in where you think it needs it. So right here, right in the center of the core, it's really bright, so I don't think it would benefit from being any brighter. But as we start to go around the Milky Way, there's definitely some areas that could benefit from being lifted up a little bit. Now I know that looked like we'd done absolutely nothing at all, but if we toggle this on and off, you can see the little difference that it did make, or the little bit that we did do makes a massive difference. And like I said, we just want little, and little makes a lot. So now we'll zoom back in, and we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to run the burn. So burn's just going to affect the shadows, and we want this exposure to be really low. So I'm going to run this at 3%. And just like I said with the dodge tool, we only want to apply this where we think we're going to benefit from it. So anywhere these dust lanes, you want to put it in, and it really starts adding definition to these dust. Up here, there's a lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool dust. And you guys might not have seen much of this dust sort of stuff in your images before, and I know I harp on about it, but it does show the advantages of running a tracker that just picks up the tiniest details that you might never have seen before. Cool little bit of dust there. Now I'm rushing through this a bit. I would normally take a lot more care with dodging and burning and the editing, but this is just sort of giving you guys the idea of what's what. So you can see the difference it's making now. It's starting to really pop out that dust. So we'll just get rid of that one. Now from here, I'm going to start looking at the foreground. So one thing I find people get wrong with blending images is not matching the exposures between their foreground and their sky. Now, we shot a lot longer exposure time for the foreground than we did for the sky. So that means the foreground's a lot brighter than what it should be. So if we took this image in a single image, the foreground would be nowhere near as bright as what it looks now. And it generally only looks weird on the horizon. So for me to make things look more natural, I'll go down and blend the exposure on the horizon line, and then feather that off as the image comes back towards the viewer. And there's no, I don't do it in any scientific way. I just wing it. So I'm just going to do a brightness adjustment layer, and I'm just going to drag it down. Now, at the moment, all I'm looking at is the horizon line. I don't care what happens at the sky at this stage. I just want to darken it down a little bit. I think that looks pretty good. So now what we're going to do is grab this mask we created before, drag it up. Yes, we want to replace it. And you can see now that it hasn't affected the sky because we've got the mask on it. It's only pulled down on the foreground, but it's darkened the whole foreground down. So we're going to click on this mask, and we're just going to bring back the brightness at the start of the foreground here. So we'll grab a brush, and we're just going to brush this out. Now if we click on our hold Alt and click, you can see only the areas that we're affecting, and if we just feather this out, we'll get a nice smooth line. So all I wanted to do was darken down that horizon line just to make it look a little bit more natural. Now for me, when you're standing there and looking at a scene, things obviously closer to you, you're going to see in detail and a little bit of light. And then things further away, you're never going to be able to see. So details on the horizon, you're never going to be able to see them. So images that show really good detail on that horizon line, they just look weird to me. So if you want to brighten them right up and have awesome details on the horizon line, yep, go for it. But for me, it just doesn't look right. So with that one done, we're just going to get rid of that one. And I'm going to run another one. So I'm going to run another brightness and contrast. So this time I'm going to pull the brightness up. And I'm going to invert this mask, grab a brush, a white brush, and I'm just going to paint in around the start here. So like I said, things that are closest to us, or things that are closest to the camera, are going to be brighter, and they're going to fade away naturally towards that horizon line. So I'll bring this back up. Now, like I said before, this is a bit of a rush job. And I'm just going to feather that out so we don't have any hard lines. And you can see what we're doing there. You can see how the brightness sort of fades away as we get into that horizon. So I'm pretty happy with that at this stage. Okay, cool. So now what I would do is duplicate this layer, and we're going to go in and do some selective dodging and burning on our foreground. Now this scene's got some awesome undulations, you know, mountains, but because the light at night time is so flat, you don't get a real good definition on those undulations in the terrain. So we're just going to put them back. Now all we're doing is essentially replicating some sort of directional light to give us some definition Now what I'm going to do is just paint in a little bit of dodging on like these ridge lines here. And all it's going to do is just replicate some sort of directional light. I'll just bring this up a little bit. Now you can go as crazy with this as you want, but like I said, I'm just going to rush through this a little bit for the purposes of today. And then same again, we're going to grab the burn tool, and we're just going to go in and burn where the natural shadows would be in this landscape. And essentially what we're doing is trying to create a bit more shape, a bit of that 3D shape. Now I know it was hard to see what we were doing there, but if we toggle this on and off, you'll see we've just added a little bit more shape and definition to those mountains. And it's really subtle, but I think it looks really cool. All right, so now that that's all done, we're starting to get into the taste part of it now. So things like the color balance or selective color, saturation, sharpening, things like that. So we're going to start with color. Now this one's going to be hard to color balance because there's so much green air glow in here, but also we've got a lot of red or red tinge from the camera being astro modified. So I'm going to run a curves. Now I'm going to zoom right in up here. Now I know this part of the sky right here doesn't have any sort of, you know, nebulosity or clouds or anything like that. So I'm going to zoom right in and I'm going to pick this center neutral grey eyedropper, and I'm just going to get a point in the sky that's black, or should be black. And I've just selected it. Now you can see what it's done here. It's done its best to tell us, you know, what it thinks is the right color balance. Now it's made this Milky Way look really red, and the nebulosity look a little bit pink. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a hue and saturation adjustment layer, and I'm just going to look at the reds. Now I just want to target that pinky sort of color, so I'm going to drag this in off the yellows there. So you can see down here, whatever we do is going to target, you know, not the yellows, but from the reds down to the pinks. I'm just going to play with it. I'm just going to see if we can shift this back. You can see that's obviously way overboard, but you can see what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring this from being really red to somewhere back to the natural color of the Milky Way, and also get these reds back towards more of a red. And I think that looks okay. Now, like I said before, I'm just sort of blazing through this to give you guys the techniques, and then you can go in and do as much, you know, mucking around with color as you want. But I normally spend a lot of time on color. So for me, I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to color. I don't like adding false colors onto it. So putting a solid color adjustment, or, you know, tinting the sky some blue or purple, or, you know, whatever's flashy on Instagram Instagram at the time, I like to stay true to life and as scientific as I can with the colour balance and the natural colour of the sky and the Milky Way. So I do spend a lot of time on the colouring part of it. But at this stage, this is reasonable. So I'm going to jump in and do some vibrance. A little bit of vibrance. I'm going to crank some saturation. Now I know that looks bad at the moment, but you'll see what I'm going to do. I'm going to jump in, invert this layer mask. Now we've got some awesome hydrogen alpha poking through. So we're just going to selectively brush back in a little bit of saturation on these hydrogen alpha areas. Alrighty, so now you can see just with a tiny bit of vibrance and saturation how much hydrogen alpha has actually come through. Now if you think that's too much, we can just come over here and just dial in back a bit, just so it doesn't look like I've dropped a box of crayons on the screen. I think that's okay. So we're going to do another one now. And this time it's going to be a global one, so we just need to be careful with how out of control this gets. And it doesn't take much for it to get out of control. Somewhere there looks okay. Yeah, that looks alright. Alrighty. Now the only other thing I would normally play with, if your image just doesn't quite look the way you want it to, I may just jump in and put a levels adjustment in it. You know, essentially we can brighten this up a little bit. And I'm just going to grab this layer mask here just so this adjustment doesn't affect the foreground. So just that, all I did with that levels adjustment was I just pulled the black point down a little bit, and you can see what it's done with the sky. It's just toned down that sky ever so slightly, just so it's not so much in your face. Now if you want to do the same again but target the foreground, we can do that here. And once again I'm just using this layer mask here. And that's a bit too much, so I'm just going to bring the opacity of that back down a little bit. So this is all just fine tuning at this stage, just making sure the brightness of the foreground and the sky look like they match, doing your saturation and your vibrance and making sure you're happy with that. Now, like you would have heard before in plenty of other videos, at this stage, I would get up and leave and, you know, go and have a couple of cold beverages, but not too many, and then come back and have a look at it. So this to me is very colourful at the moment, and if I get up and come back in half an hour's time, this is probably going to look like a dog's breakfast. So I would go back in and tweak the colours, tweak the saturation, and get it to somewhere that I'm happy with, then I would get up and leave again, and then I'll just keep doing the same. Now that I might leave it for a day and come back. The worst thing that you can do for yourself is sit at a computer for 2 hours, rip through an edit, think it looks awesome, upload it onto Instagram or Facebook, look at it the next day and go, wow, that, you know, it looks like a clown's bloody been hit with a paint bucket. It's, yeah. So anyway, we're pretty much getting towards the end of this now. Now, I'm just going to merge these down, and we're going to jump in and have a look at the noise and sharpening on this. Now, to be fair, like there's the noise, there's I would not hit with this with any noise reduction at this stage. I mean, all we're going to do is lose all these stars. They're all just going to start blurring out. The image is just going to get blurry. So at this stage, I don't think I'm going to give it any noise reduction. And also, you can start to see in the sky there is a little bit of definition in this air glow. You can just start to see the structure to the air glow, and I don't want to lose that, so I'm pretty happy with that. All I'm going to do is just duplicate this layer, and I'm going to jump up and do a filter, sharpen, and then I'm just going to do an unsharp mask. And I don't want to be too hardcore on this. So I'm going to start with that, and then the great thing about Photoshop is we can obviously come back and turn the opacity down or delete that layer. It is a little bit much, so we're just going to dial this back a little bit. Yeah, so I think we'll go about 59. I think that'll do for now. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. I'll just crop out little things like that. But essentially, that's a start to finish on how I edit my tracked panorama images. So I just want to stress again that this was just sort of blazed through, otherwise we'd be here for hours and hours and hours. So each step there, really take your time to get things right, and little by little by little, just keep adding to those layers every time. But you know, that's sort of given you the whole overview of how I do it, and I hope it's helped you out a little bit. So thanks for taking time out of your day to watch my video, and for those who have watched and liked and subscribed, I really do appreciate it. It helps the channel out heaps, and I just want to keep growing this channel and keep bringing you content that either you just enjoy watching or maybe you learn something from it. Either way there. So for you guys who this is your first video, welcome. I hope you've enjoyed it and got something out of it. I'd love for you to subscribe and jump down in the comments and just let me know if it's helped you out, or you know what you would do differently. A bit of feedback's always welcome for sure. And just jump down in the comments and have a yarn. I love chatting with you guys, and you know, creating this little community of people who are all sort of into the same thing. It's a really cool hobby to do, and yeah, I just really appreciate the support. But with that said, I think that's time to go. Till next time, cheers guys.